Welcome to the U.S.-Ukraine Summit 8, providing Ukraine with an annual report card 2020. My name is Walter Zaryckyj. I've had the pleasure of being the program coordinator, and I will have the honor of being the host moderator for today's. Now, quickly, this is the quickest I've ever done this. Quickly about the why. For all of those that may be joining for the first time, 20 years ago, in 2000, the 8 listed sponsors, encouraged by the fact that Ukraine had signaled its intention to ultimately become a paid-up member of the European Atlantic community with stronger bilateral ties to the United States and Canada, as well as eventual membership in EU and NATO, decided to put on an event for the ages. The Ukraine's quest for mature nation statehood roundtable. The event featuring dignitaries like Zbigniew Brzezinski, Paul Wolfowitz, Boris Tarachuk, Mitch McConnell, with the iconic Sandy Levin to open, and the equally iconic Ben Gilman to close, was such a success that it became a yearly affair. It also became a way to monitor the progress towards Ukraine's end goal. In effect, to look at what standards to meet and the like. The issues touched upon were essentially overarching in nature, above the fray of the always boisterous political scene in Ukraine. But in 2010, for the first time, the situational impinged on the overarching. There appeared a sea change, a chance of real backsliding right off the Western vector that Ukraine had chosen. So the same organizations agreed in 2012 to create a second yearly forum to closely monitor any serious detectable regress. For a moment in early 2014, in the aftermath of the Revolution of Dignity, the report card organizers thought that a post-Maidan Ukraine might not need their report card anymore. All was back on track towards a bright, new Euro-Atlantic future. But the Kremlin would not have any of it. It gave Ukraine war and the loss of sovereignty over important parts of its eastern and southern lands and resources. As a result, the organizers, recognizing the existential threat that still confronted Ukraine and its westward dreams, decided to keep the report card series in play. The report cards of the early Poroshenko years indicated that Ukraine was steadily climbing out of the hole that the Yanukovych junta and the first year of the war had started. The later years showed a leveling off. Too strong a word to call stagnation, but a leveling off of progress. Last year's report card, dealing with the arrival of the post-Maidan government of President Zelensky, indicated a cautious optimism. We'll see it in terms of when the tally master tells us a B minus. That puts this report card in an interesting position. Our 2020 report card will cover the Z government's or President Zelensky's government's performance after a full year in office. This should prove very, very interesting. We want to say that for our first word, we're inviting someone who is one of the true veterans of Ukrainian diplomacy. In fact, he started his career in foreign service in 1981. He has served in some of the most prestigious posts that you can imagine. He has served as an envoy to Russia. In fact, he was recalled for consultations immediately after the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. He then moved on to serve as permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, now presently serves as ambassador of Ukraine to the United Nations. I don't know if we have a stronger and better veteran diplomat at the post than we have presently with Ambassador Yelchenko. Ambassador Yelchenko, the word is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Walter. Good morning, everybody in the United States, and good afternoon in Ukraine. I'd like to thank you for your continuous interest and passion for Ukraine. And today's and tomorrow's event is very important to that end. Over the past 12 months, which have been unprecedented for the entire world, Ukraine went through major transformations. A new president, Volodymyr Zelensky, gained the support of over 73% of Ukrainians at the elections in April last year. The Ukrainian people demanded changes and results and gave him a clear mandate to tackle head-on the threats and problems that the country is facing. Russian aggression that continues for over 6 years in a row, in fact longer than World War II. The corruption that despite all previous efforts had not been eradicated, and speeding up reforms that would tangibly improve the lives of all Ukrainians. Ukrainians elected a new parliament, bringing new faces to the Ukrainian politics. The new government was formed last fall, and after several months in office, was replaced with even newer one in the beginning of this calendar year. The new government tasked with delivering real results and delivering them fast. Over the 29 years of Ukraine's independence, people have been longing for real changes, and these changes are long overdue. For many years and for many different reasons, changes were too slow to come, and the excuses were too many. By now, a couple of generations of people living in modern Ukraine have been comparing Ukraine's report card with report cards of its Eastern European neighbors, and were not too happy with the progress. Things needed to change. What is never changing is Ukraine's course towards becoming a strong and prosperous democratic European nation, a full-fledged member of European and transatlantic institutions. This course towards EU and NATO membership is written in the Ukrainian constitution. The course towards becoming a nation free of corruption, a true Western-style democracy, a nation of freedom and the rule of law, has once and for all been set during the Revolution of Dignity. These are the goals we are working on and the values Ukrainians are fighting for, defending our land and our choice of our way of life from the ongoing Russian military aggression. A lot has been accomplished over the past 12 months, but a lot more needs to be done. After many years and after countless promises by practically all convocations by the Rada in the past, the total immunity of members of parliament was finally lifted. The law on land market finally passed, removing anachronistic restrictions and opening up major opportunities for development of Ukraine's agriculture and return to being the breadbasket of Europe. The new law on banking sector has been passed. Top priority is given to judicial reform. Ongoing full-scale privatization will allow Ukraine to attract new investments. High priority is given to the digital economy and to further implementation of e-government. The main goal here is to have a state in a smartphone, which minimizes the interaction between business and bureaucrats to decrease the human factor and the possibility of corruption. Successful reform of decentralization goes on. The government is also focusing on the reform of financial system, customs and tax services, reduction of the state budget deficit, raising the income of Ukrainians, comprehensive education and health care reforms. Last week, Ukraine was granted the status of an enhanced opportunities partner, which marks a new era of our cooperation with NATO. It is an important milestone which recognizes the contribution of Ukraine to NATO-led operations and which brings us closer to the membership in the alliance. The support of the international community in our reform efforts, in particular in security and defense sector, will help Ukraine to reach the ambitious yet realistic goal of becoming a full-fledged member of European and transatlantic community. Ukraine's government is directing efforts at finding ways to put an end to the war waged by Russia against our country. As I already mentioned, Russia's military aggression against Ukraine and its occupation of parts of our territory has lasted for more than 6 years now. Russia continues to supply weapons and ammunition across the border. Numerous ceasefire initiatives remain virtual. The humanitarian situation in conflict-affected areas in Donetsk and Lugansk regions is disastrous. With the new president, new parliament, and the new government, Ukraine's position remains firm, and the red lines remain unchanged. Today, continued transatlantic unity, and in particular, strong position of the United States, are as critical as ever. There must be no rollback of sanctions against Russia, gets out of Ukraine, and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is fully restored, including Crimea. And there must be no business as usual with the aggressor. The challenges the international community currently faces only enhances the importance of strong partnerships and cooperation in all spheres of our life. We are tackling these challenges together. I would like once again to thank you, all organizers and all participants, for all your support and for taking part in this important event. And I very much look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
I wanted to thank the ambassador for wonderful words. As a first word, it's a wonderful opening, and I move right to our next speaker, who probably does not need any introduction at this point, but is the current chairman of the Committee on Euro Integration, Verkhovna Rada, a leading member of the European Solidarity Fraction within that Rada, and earlier served as Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. In fact, at that post, she won the highest possible praise. For the topic that we've given her, why Ukraine being prosperous, free, and at peace, is perfect for her. So again, Ambassador Yelchenko, thank you. And again, Pani Ivanna, it's all yours.
Thank you, Volodko. Dear colleagues, Ambassador, I'm happy to greet you even through Zoom possibility, and I'm grateful for this invitation and for actually initiating, from my perspective, very timely discussion on Ukraine. And you are asking the question why Ukraine still matters. I would immediately try to rephrase your suggested topics, because I believe that Ukraine matters even more. And maybe by the time we get to the end of the whole discussions that will be held within this framework, with the closing remarks of Rose Göttemüller, we will have the summary that ensures that Ukraine matters even more to the Western world, to the democracy, to those who care about values. I wanted to start with some phrase that is part of our already newest historical memory, which came from Donald Tusk, the former chair of the European Council. He said at one point that do not teach them, Ukrainians, to be Europe. Learn from them what Europe is. And yes, we're still here in Ukraine, especially after the revolution of dignity. We believe in values. We are becoming a political nation that is trying to aspire for these major values and freedoms that are common for the Western world. And obviously, both Western world and Europe are not bounded exclusively by boundaries of the of institutions like NATO and the EU. Obviously, with Britain leaving the EU, it didn't leave Europe, and those countries that are not part of NATO, for example, they still belong to Western community, even though they might be at other continents like Japan or Australia. We geographically, though, are very close, and that's why are aspiring to become part of the European and Euro-Atlantic family, because we believe that by values and by our beliefs, we belong to that, and by our history, by our culture, we do belong to that particular space. However, while preparing for this particular intervention, you know, I was looking through some of my earlier notes that I had preparing to other conferences, and I came across my my speech in the Kyiv Security Forum of 2018, where I presented some idea that I had about wider situation in the world, which is kind of I tuned it to 3 letters: CRC, that was about confrontation, re-evaluation, and counteraction. And you know, I think that right now, putting Ukraine in a wider context, in global context, I would say that really not that much has changed, because you know, confrontation was about the threat of new global confrontation that is ongoing, and that is even more developing with the new threats that we are all facing, like the pandemic, for example, that we all have to go over with. And that's a global confrontation between democracy and populism, between freedom and captivity, between global world and isolationism, between past and the future. And these confrontations, it has seemed then to be, in 2018, to be inevitable. And I think that it is even more vivid right now, that it is inevitable, and it's part of our world. And we cannot anymore reduce the challenges to the freedom and the attack on freedom and democracy as some temporary challenges, I believe. And that's going worldwide, and obviously from our perspectives here, since we are not going to discuss here China, we are not going to discuss North Korea, we are not going to discuss the maybe populism in the Western world, but something that we are feeling very vividly on our shoulders, on our own experience, that's a systematic and purposeful attack of Russian Federation on the free world. This attack is ongoing on different nations, on individual freedoms, on collective expression, on freedoms, and you know, the lack of clear response to this attacks of Russian Federation, and perceiving Russian Federation by some members of the global community as a kind of normal country, a normal player, not without some peculiarities, has actually led to, for all of us, to feel the attacks of Russian Federation on all soils, not only here by direct aggression in Ukraine, but also, you know, through electoral intervention in the US, through different fundings of the radical forces in different countries, through undermining the results, the facts in the referenda that have been held in the Netherlands, or the Catalan referendum, hacking attacks in Bundestag in Germany, and many other things and places. I also looked through the recent Brookings Institution report on the latest weapons of political warfare, and they are saying that even the rise of populist movements in Europe has come across not without Russian intervention. So therefore, I think all of this brings us to the need of re-evaluation. How do we act? What do we know about ourselves, and what do we know about protection of our values? And so therefore, I think that this re-evaluation is very important and is central to our freedoms and democracy, because otherwise we will end up in the new division of the world, so to say, Yalta 2. And I think it's important to understand that all those countries that are committed to democracy and to ensure that human rights, that major basic freedoms that have been cherished in the Western world are so important for everybody. We all have to be committed to act right now, and I think that it's important to demonstrate kind of common action, and not only agree that we have a coalition to protect our values, but also take specific actions and act together. So therefore, we are coming to counteraction And there in this counter action, it's important to actually finally clearly reject the narratives that Kremlin is trying to insert in all of our different societies in the through and going through the public domain. And I think that this reaffirming of democracy has to be happening both through freedoms, also through economic freedoms, that freedom, and taking off some barriers that would ensure that those nations that are aspiring to build a free world, they will have access to economic possibility. Thus, their people, including in Ukraine, would feel the benefits of this economic prosperity also. I think that we also have to ensure that we are not working in this free, economically also free world with totalitarian and autocratic regimes, and we have to be clear about our stance. But that takes courage, that takes leadership, that takes serious effort, and definitely the hybrid threats that we all share, that we are all challenges that we are all facing, I think also ask and require common action. So therefore, in this whole situation, in all these stages that we are still undergoing, going through, I think it's very clear that that Ukraine stable, Ukraine democratic, Ukraine free, independent matters even more. You remember probably in the Munich Security Conference this year, there was a question, is the world becoming less Western? My answer to that question right now is yes, and I think that we all have to do everything in order to ensure that those nations that are aspiring to be more Western, with all the hurdles, with all the difficulties, they deserve support and shoulder and prioritization in the national agendas of those countries that have reached already some of the kind of higher stages of their democratic and economic development. But I also think that Ukraine, and Ambassador has outlined that the expectations a year ago have been very high. People have given a whole mandate to the new Ukrainian authorities with mono-majority in the parliament, with president in his office, with governments being formed and already unfortunately sacked, and all this. There was a lot of expectation, the positive side of the expectation, that so far on the level of declarations and some actions, we are continuing the course that has been chosen by the Ukrainian people after the Revolution of Dignity. However, unfortunately, every single day, more and more concerns with regard to some of the reforms that have been kind of backbone of the changes that Ukraine has been going through after the Revolution of Dignity have been either halted or experienced some serious rollbacks. And that's about medical reform, that's about educational reform, that's about decentralization reform. So therefore, for us here in Ukraine, for the active part of the civil society, for those who have been putting a lot of effort in making sure that Ukraine, even with all the difficulties, has been moving towards the West, this is very worrisome tendency right now. And we here believe that it's important to be as straightforward and as, sometimes critical and sometimes praising with the current authorities as you have, as our friends from the West, including in the US, including in the European countries, have been with us when we were working in the government of Ukraine. It wasn't always easy to hear the criticism. It wasn't always pleasant to have your concerns pointed to some of the issues that have not been easily solved, for example, in Ukraine. But I think it was about real partnership, and it was about real sincerity in our relation, and that's what we are lacking right now. Because I think that in today's Ukraine, unfortunately, we have to admit that we are witnessing an alarming retreat of from democracy, and that is unfortunately being represented in the ruining of checks and balances between the parliament, the government, the president, unfortunately judiciary. Even though it was mentioned that judicial reform is ongoing, unfortunately judiciary is losing its independence. Unfortunately, law enforcement agencies have been instrumentalized in order to attack volunteers, veterans, activists, Maidan activists. Also, we are witnessing here the political persecution of the fifth president of Ukraine, Poroshenko. Just tomorrow, he will have to go to the court to stand charges of a pretty strange case. I do hope that the attention of the international community is going to be kind of focused also on this case, in order to ensure that everybody has the right of a free and fair trial, and presumption of innocence is the guiding kind of principle of the law, of the rule of law in Ukraine, as in every other country. So therefore, I'm just getting to this final point of mine. I think it's important, you know, when the child is growing, when Ukraine is painfully, during the Russian ongoing aggression that is continuously developing on our soil, when we are losing the soldiers, when we are losing our defenders, when creeping annexation of the Azov and Azov Aquatorium and the Black Sea is ongoing, when Crimea remains annexed and occupied, when we have millions of internally displaced people, all of this is ongoing. At this particular moment, I think it's the matter of being truthful to each other and making sure that Ukraine is not sliding back to the influence of the revanchist forces in Ukraine and to Russian orbit. And there, obviously, the big role here is for the civil society in Ukraine, for different political forces in Ukraine. But also, I think what matters is making sure that on the radar screens of our Western partners, Ukraine is still as high as it deserves to be, that Ukraine is not sliding down the list of priorities that everybody is paying attention to because of the urgent needs to respond on the national level and on the global level. So my wording would be that kind of reference to making sure that Ukrainians are still the last romantics in Europe. We still believe that we will overcome, we will come up with we will fulfill our strategic goals of joining the EU and NATO, but we definitely need support on this track. And we remember that Europe was built out of a dream. We remember that founding fathers in the US also have been seen as dreamers, but we are dreamers, realists, and we understand that on the way to a dream, to achieve a dream, we need the support of partners who know, who have some answers to those questions that we are facing right now.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Pani Ivanka. I wanted to simply say we don't have time, I think, for the questions anymore because we know that you have a deadline, but there is one question that was asked that might be interesting. There were actually two that are yes and no's for both you and the ambassador, and I'll give it about 2 minutes on the answer. And that is, one, is the Euro-Atlantic posture that Ukraine has taken irreversible? Either one of you. And second, does the conflict really absorb an enormous amount of resources that would otherwise go for reforms? Yes or no?
Definitely conflict. Let me start. Definitely the conflict absorbs a lot of not only financial resources, not only attention span resources, but also moral resources, not only of the authorities but of the society, to ensure that you know that we are first of all defending ourselves, but secondly also responding to the needs of those people who have suffered from the war on our territory that is still ongoing. So yes, the answer to this question is yes. With regard to irreversibility of Euro-Atlantic aspirations of Ukraine, I believe that you know, quite a few people have been ironic and skeptical. Exactly a year ago, a year and 3 months ago, when we were putting the changes to the constitution, we were adopting the changes to the constitution of Ukraine, where we stated the strategic course of membership in the EU and NATO as a clear strategic goal for Ukraine in the constitution. But I think that right now this is a very serious protector of the irreversibility of this course. So I hope that this is kind of last resort that will not allow any Ukrainian authorities to change the course. And Ukrainian public and Ukrainian people will not allow that as well. We have the support for that.
Thank you, Mr. Vanka. Ambassador Yelchenko, to you.
Thank you. Well, my both answers will be yes, of course. The course is absolutely irreversible. It's fixed in constitution, as I said. It's shared by the vast majority of Ukrainian population. I mean, both NATO and the EU. I would like to remind you that just a couple of years ago, the positive attitude towards NATO was never higher than, let's say, 25-30%. Now it's very stable, 60+, which is even more than in some other Eastern European countries and aspirants. With regard to the reforms and conflicts, I'd like to add that in a way, probably it would sound silly a little bit, but in Donbass, Ukraine has lost about 1/4 of its industrial potential. At the same time, when the territories will be returned, the whole territory will need to be, totally refurbished, renovated. As we inherited in Donbass a lot of old Soviet-style industry, it needed to be reconstructed anyway. So probably with the end of the conflict, we will even have more opportunities. And of course, here comes the added value of international assistance, which is already given to Ukraine. And probably this is on a later stage when we come to the point of industrial renovation of Donbass, but the time will come, I think, sooner than later. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Thank you to both of my guests. You really, truly have opened up the report card in a very, very positive, very constructive way. So again, I would thank both of our guests, Ambassador Volodymyr Yelchenko and Pani Ivanna Klympush. Again, thank you for all your hard work also from us.